presentation. Thank you all for coming.
We're really humbled to be able to have Mark here coming and talking and sharing his inspiration and knowledge. And I'm glad to see everybody here. And yeah, looking forward to hearing what you got to share with us.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I arrived in Bakersfield a couple of days ago, and I've been really looking forward to being here. Stephen and I have been talking about me coming to visit for quite a while, and the reason that he was interested in having me come is I've been involved for about 3 decades in making a lot of good things happen in the city where I live, and always working on things in a way so that other cities can learn from what we're doing, and not just as we're the source of ideas, but that we're always exchanging ideas, and city to city, neighborhood to neighborhood, people inspiring each other to be able to make things happen on a grassroots level. And obviously that means engaging kids and engaging a whole lot of challenges too, in order to make things happen. And of course, agriculture, gardens, urban agriculture, permaculture, these are projects and tools by which a lot of community building can happen. For one thing, it's of interest to everyone to have food security and locally available healthy food. So everybody's kind of leaning forward when they hear people talking about that. It also happens to be one of the most accessible ways for people to enter, getting involved, learning, contributing. Like, you might not know anything about how a garden works, but you might be able to handle a shovel and a wheelbarrow. And along the way, people just keep learning more and more about the world they've been living in the whole time that they never knew they didn't know. Like, for instance, typically in the country, surely it must be the same in Bakersfield, I watched a guy mowing a lawn out here that had just been mowed. Like, that's so typical in the country that you're just sitting there maintaining what is really a landscape of arrested adolescence, just constantly keeping the grass sliced off as it's trying to grow and cast shade, and it hopes to seed so that it helps to create a lot of other things that nature's trying to do, but we keep just cutting it and cutting it and cutting it and maintaining it kind of like it's a carpet that we never use. Along the way, though, you learn that as you throw away those yard clippings, especially as you sweep up leaves and just put them in the dumpster or in a green bin or something, and who knows where they go, at some point you realize that all that biomass is supposed to be laying on the ground, building soil fertility. And if you did that, then the ground itself would hold more moisture, and you'd have more biological activity, more microbial activity under the ground. But by constantly slicing it off and removing even the chance for it to shade itself, you kind of wreck the conditions for the good things to happen that really support biodiversity and human community. So I don't want to blame that guy for doing his job out there, but as I got out of my truck, I just was like, wow, this is sparkling. They've just watered it. It looks like a living room carpet. And then he was coming by to mow it again. It was confusing to me. So I've been involved in a lot of projects that have to do with offering educational opportunities for people. And I can say the whole time I've been getting educated myself. Because once you're involved in things as an activist, you're constantly going to an edge where you don't really entirely know what you're doing. So you have to start to develop a confidence that you can figure it out as you go. And that's, I don't know. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this idea of the journey of the hero. But all throughout our life, we're given these, we're put into these circumstances where we don't exactly know, and we can either give up early, or we can engage it and try to figure it out. And the more times you try to figure it out, the more you start to realize that you really are capable of doing almost anything that you put your attention to. So I want to stop there for a second before I say more about the projects that we've been up to, and just give people a chance here to say who's here, and maybe say your name and something that you bring to this community that people would really like to know about you. And be really brief, because there's a fair amount of people here. So if you could start, Nathan. Well, that was a little challenging because of all the noise, but I just want to point out that every time we get people together, we have the opportunity to know who is also there. And so I encourage you, if anybody here is coming from a place or is offering a skill or some kind of capacity that you're interested in, I invite you to approach that person and introduce yourself. It's a thing that I think a lot of people in the USA don't get enough practice in, just saying hello. And then that's actually an issue I work on all the time, trying to address people feeling isolated and separated. And particularly after COVID, I think people have gotten out of practice, a little bit tentative, maybe a little bit afraid, a little freaked out. So anyway, it's good to start practicing asking for help and saying hello again. The success of all the work that we've been doing in Portland, across especially the east side of the city where working class people live, is really based on that focus to build community. And in every case, whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's a gardening project or a community housing project, or actually, frankly, doing a lot of things out in the street that started off being illegal, but turned out to be such a good idea that the city council and the mayor loved it and made it all legal. I'll say a bit more about that. Yeah, there's a bit of libertarianism in that kind of behavior. All that is a means to build community. And so whatever it may be, the point is to help people have practice in being able to speak. Because like they say that the thing that people are more afraid of in this country, even than death, is public speaking. Like, don't make me talk to all those people with ears. You know, all those people with thumbs just like me, I can't relate to them. Yeah, it's supposed to be a big challenge for us, but the more that people get involved in doing good community work, the more relaxed they get, the more confident they get, and the more powerful they get. The more friends they have, the safer their communities become. And all these goals and objectives we have for things like food security don't just become possible, they become a reality. So I personally feel very strongly that getting anything done depends upon, as permaculture tells us over and over again, to just get started. So I want to run through a kind of a litany of stories here, and I might have to do a little contact improvisation to explain some of this. Hopefully I can just sit here. But every one of the things I'm going to describe, there's these kind of questions that you have to engage over and over again. Like, how do you get access to land? In a lot of cases like this one, I would imagine that some relationship building had to be done by somebody. And these are a lot of stories you might not even be aware of. You can see it's a beautiful, well-organized kind of facility here, community space. But what's the backstory? How did it even get to happen? There's always these like pioneer species people who go in to try to just get access to space. And this is an enormous social ecological justice issue that has to be engaged initially. So how do you get access to land? Ultimately, who has ownership? On this question hangs the future of whether or not that community space that so many people pour love and attention into, and layers of learning and relationship building happen there. On this question of it's long-term ownership, the whole fate of the garden depends. For a lot of community gardens, they're there for years. Somebody comes along and says, well, I've changed my mind and I own the place and I'm going to put in some big tall thing so I can just extract as much as I can before I check out of this life. That's kind of oversimplifying it, but that's the fate of a lot of really great community initiatives. The beautiful thing is, even if that's what happens, everybody gets to learn all that time before it's taken away, and hopefully even the taking away becomes a thing that you feel so strongly that then the garden lives in you until you get to manifest it again in some way. So in the meantime, I don't know the ownership of this. I don't know its fate, but I know that it's creating all these seeds inside of us to take its lessons and its love, forward into the future so that it's a legacy, and hopefully it remains and many gardens come from it. It's a seed of an idea and you can taste it, but it's also the seed of an idea that Bakersfield will one day grow enough food so that no matter what happens in any other part of the world, if we run out of oil or what have you, that Bakersfield will be able to feed itself. And so this is this powerful example that needs to persist, needs to continue to build affinity and relationships. It needs to attract funding. It needs to attract lots of volunteers. I just want to put out this message for anybody who volunteers at all. Like, I hope that you make a commitment in your heart for a multi-year, maybe even a generational commitment to this place. Make it conscious, because it won't persist without people coming back and showing up over and over again and bringing their friends. And as part of that commitment, to just shower it with all kinds of love so that it gets more and more wonderful, every week, every month, so that it just becomes so attractive, over time, that people can't help but take care of it. I swear, every intentional community, and many of them do fail, more than 50% of intentional communities. And by that I don't just mean housing, I mean a project like this persists because of internal problems, disengagement, fluctuations in the economy. There's so many different reasons that things dissipate and fall apart. So making a commitment is extraordinarily powerful. And it means the difference between really the future that you dream of or not. I don't mean to make it sound scary, but you have to remain involved. And as people have been saying for hundreds of years, democracy takes constant attention, constant participation. When we take our eye off the situation, very confused people or very confused dynamics can derail the best aspirations that are manifest love. And that's what this place seems to be to me as I look around, all this love and care and attention on every single inch. It's so inspiring. Well, so besides about ownership, also, how is the vision elicited? How is the vision created, and whose vision is it? When it comes to a community garden, it's almost always seeded from the very beginning. Before it even starts, the seeds are, common benefit, like individuals coming together to do something that uplifts everyone. It's really like a great barn raising that just takes love and tending the whole time. And it starts off as a collaborative vision. Like, you might say, oh, this is some one person's, but even then, if you felt that way, that one person would be sitting there trying to figure out how to help others or how to heal the world, how to do things that affect, their own children. So whose vision is it? When it comes to urban agriculture, it's a whole lot of people realizing that they're in it together. So it's a noble vision, it's inclusive, it's for every single person and every family and every scale of community. We were talking yesterday at a gathering just a few minutes from here, also in Bakersfield, about the fact that there's this confusing, backwards paradox that people who keep wrecking stuff are really depending on people who keep creating stuff. And a lot of times those people who are creating stuff have very little to work with, but they have hope and inspiration. The people who are confused and keep dislocating those creative people and keep sort of smashing what they're doing to create big extractive projects, those people are depending on these people without even knowing it to save their freaking world. So against all odds, but the beautiful thing that can keep propelling you is the more you step into this work, the more you heal yourself and get stronger and stronger. I guess I would say about my own self, I used to be the most painful introvert. I couldn't talk to anybody. I sat in a corner and drew pictures all the time. And finally I started to step into stuff because I've had strong feelings about it. And now I'm just feeling as comfortable as can be talking with people because I've learned that it's only good to identify with other people. And most people just want you to succeed. You know, they want you to succeed and they're cheering you on. And anybody who's not is probably having a real hard time in some way. So the purpose and the vision here is for everyone's benefit. So you should be feeling real welcome. There's a lot of politics to this that we're also engaging. I mean, as a lot of you know already, and you maybe have an inkling of it or you may have a really strong feeling about it, growing local food sometimes sets some people off. And it might frighten them. Just like seeing community come together and become powerful is threatening to some interests. One of the big projects that I'm working on, speaking of that, I've been working on it for most of my adult life. In fact, I've been traveling through Southern California for almost 30 years, giving presentations about this issue. So for some reason, American neighborhoods don't have, by and large, any community gathering places. And it's an interesting thing that Americans have to save their money and fly across the ocean to visit these wonderful villages where you just identify really strongly with the people and the place there. And sometimes it's not explained very well, but if you go to visit a village, you'll see villagers. And why it feels so wonderful there is that the village that you're visiting was made by people as a way of meeting their needs. And they meet their needs beautifully. They meet their needs in a way that brings them together all the time. And you see in places like that, gathering places throughout these villages. And, you might read in the paper, this culture has super low crime rates and super high rates of safety and public health. And then if it's a really good article, it'll contrast it with a neighborhood in Portland or Bakersfield or Los Angeles and point out that it's the opposite, that crime rates are high, public health is low, and we have very few places for community, very few community spaces. What's so interesting about the neighborhoods in the USA is that they are all laid out on paper. They're designed down to the last nail, as our architect friend can attest. The entire city is meticulously designed and planned. And yet for some reason, neighborhood by neighborhood, we omit the most important pieces of all, which is the program of community spaces. People should be asking, why is there no freaking village center in any neighborhood in the entire city? Why do people have to work so hard to create a place to educate children outside and get their hands in the soil? Why do we have to work so hard every single time? Why would a neighborhood not be laid out in a way that considers that? So it's a cause, and it's right under our feet. We experience that isolation every day. If you go to a neighborhood that actually has a bunch of community programming, people actually walk around saying hello. They're not terrified, like, oh no, I've run out of eggs. My God, I'll have to talk to my neighbor. How am I going to do that? I'll have to be 6 feet away for sure. Maybe they can toss me the egg. I'll bring a pillow. Like, people are alienated from each other, but in communities that have, not just a great public square, but play spaces sprinkled around, and certainly gardens everywhere, and shade trees and fruit trees. I'm talking about neighborhoods that really do exist where I live in Portland, Oregon. And not because somebody designed it, it's because we retrofit it. We retrofit a neighborhood, we retrofit it with policies that enable people to plant fruit and nut trees everywhere in the streets. You can locate community composting facilities for free. This is the crazy thing about how far our city's gone in community building. You can locate a community composting facility out in the public right-of-way, and you're automatically insured and permitted, even though you haven't even told the Department of Transportation that you've done it. At a certain point, they're like, we're doing all this stuff out in the street, and the risk managers are telling the city bureaucrats, risk is actually going down. And so we should be incentivizing this behavior all over the city. And so the mayor authorizes the bureau to make it so that you can do almost anything that freaking you want out in the streets for free on your own authority, which should be appealing to a libertarian. So yeah, I just want to let the cat out of the bag here. Really bad metaphor, by the way. We came to realize in our work about 30 years ago that as we were looking at villages versus neighborhoods, we said, wow, there really is no gathering places in our entire neighborhood, and in any of the neighborhoods of the city of Portland. We do have parks, but no village centers. So we proposed to the Department of Transportation, hey, can you let us repurpose a few street intersections? Because we notice in all these nations of the world, whether we're looking at Mali, villages in Mali, or villages in Spain, or Italy, or France, or Germany, that intersections get to be public spaces. Could we maybe repurpose some intersections? And they said, what are you, crazy? That's public space, so nobody can use it. And we were like, wow, that's just the most amazing thing I've ever heard. So through a process of empowering ourselves to just simply create, we started to turn street intersections into public squares. And believe it or not, the police actually loved what we had done and said that they refused to even report it because it was such a beautiful thing. And one, as I quoted yesterday, this very tall, scary-looking policeman said, I'm paid to stop stuff which is bad, but not stuff which is good. And when the Department of Transportation gets mad, call the police, and we will stand with you. Because you're trying to make your community safer. You're trying to create a place where people will even talk. And you know what? The insurance companies that insure not only homes but streets said, hey, this is literally a quote, said, hey, I just had to pay out $50,000 because a trailblazer punched someone in the face the other day. He's like, if you're going to be nice to each other, like if you're going to paint the streets together and build benches on the corners, the crime is going to go down, and your premiums will also go down. So anyway, fast forward, where we are is that every neighborhood in the city of Portland can transform as many street intersections into public squares as they want to for free, right now. A few years later, it became the streets in between the intersections in all residential zones. And then next, they said, between the property line, well, across the street, you can now create any manner of interactive features, including, of course, raised planters. You can plant food out in the right-of-way as much as you want throughout all of those thousands of miles of the city, and repurpose that space, build benches, build community spaces. So game on. Like if people are feeling powerless in Oregon, it's just that they haven't been paying attention, because they can literally step right out of their door and start to address almost any issue that they care about on a big scale and start creating a local model. And when you create that local model, I promise you, blog posts, TV coverage, all kinds of different, like print media, people will come and ask you what in the world you've done, because they're really interested in hearing the story. And the beautiful thing is, every time the story gets told, people get inspired because they're facing the same issues as you are in their own neighborhood. Isolation, all of these endemic, persistent, seemingly insolvable issues. So it's a bit of a political challenge. Basically what I'm saying is our neighborhoods are designed to isolate us. And I'm talking about 1785, when the Continental Congress literally blueprinted Roman colonialism as the pattern for expanding westward expansion. It was a set of patterns that would erase the native cultural patterns that had persisted here for thousands of years. And I don't think I need to explain that the Romans, when they put this over conquered people, they weren't interested in building community. They were interested in regimenting conquered people and conquered space. So if someone, I mean, you could literally walk up to a planning bureau right now, right up to the front desk and say, hey, I just heard we live in the Roman grid. What's that about? Don't we live in America? And they would say, well, that's just normal. I mean, that the grid is, I was taught in college, the grid is synonymous with democracy, which is bull. It's actually synonymous with isolation and disempowerment. To make everywhere the same, what we were told is it democratizes everything by reducing everyone to the same experience. So that's actually exactly the opposite of the truth. The beautiful thing about community infrastructure is whether you're living in an ancient village, basically a community-inspired village, or you're living here, all the community infrastructure was always up to the people to create anyway. It has to be your idea, it has to be your inspiration, and the beautiful thing, it has to be your manifestation. And when you're done with the first version, you are so freaking powerful that you're ready for more. You know, the cool thing, I just want to refer to permaculture for a second, because up in the Northwest region, we have a lot of invasive ivy, and we have a saying that relates to this challenge of building community, and it's that English ivy only thrives in the absence of the native ecology. So I submit to you, isolation, disempowerment, even gang violence is persisting in the absence of of the dynamism that's supposed to be there. And only the community can inspire and drive that dynamism. It's all about us. So of course stuff is playing out. You know, here's one of the most, I think, insidious gigs that a space like this actually addresses, and it's this, that American communities are zoned, and the urbanist will totally understand this, are zoned so that Americans have to get up in the morning and leave where they live to go to the work zone and make the money to pay for the place they barely get to be in the home zone. And on the other hand, the places that we love to visit in the world are integrated in terms of living and working, so that at the end of the day, you haven't just made stuff or made money, your relationships have deepened as you walk the same streets as the people that you live with and you work with. The best places, of course, are pedestrian-based, not laid out to encourage consumption and support automobile culture. So we obviously have a huge challenge there. So, huge design issues. But the beautiful thing is, when we engage them, we benefit others, we address the issues, and we grow our voice, and we heal ourselves. So there's almost no reason to not engage. A lot of times, it's not a question of money at all, but more a question of inspiration and sharing. And you know, of course, we've been kind of cultivated in a way to be, or to say, I would say conditioned to be selfish, to be individuated. I don't like to use the word individualistic, because it seems as if that's a choice. Individuated is where your patterns have been designed to be separate from each other. Anyway, I'm talking about stuff this garden addresses mightily in every way. I'm just saying it's a political issue. Public space is a political issue. The existence of a community garden is in the face of a wave of constraints and issues that it is up to us to challenge. So I want to say a few things about some of the stuff that we've been doing that are kind of fun stories. In 1999, a group of houseless people wanted to create a village in Portland, Oregon. And what resulted from their powerful resistance culture, their refusal to be swept. I mean, the police would sweep them, but they moved around the landscape looking for a next place. It became this fascinating story that the media was covering, because the houseless people would have shopping cart parades through the city, and people began to wonder where they would land next as the police were sweeping them. Now, what the police were doing was actually illegal, because a circuit court judge had declared that the anti-camping ordinance was itself unconstitutional, because it was saying that people are criminals simply because they're impoverished and have nowhere to sleep. A lot of people were talking in the city. For one thing, people were saying, well, why is nomadic culture so completely illegal? Like, it used to be a perfectly viable way of being. Some people quoted this story from the Bible about how Cain murders Abel, and Cain's name means the empire, and Abel's name means the nomad. So just as Cain kills his brother, supposedly empire has killed nomadic culture. It's an allegory. It's an allegory for our own state here. So here you have a lot of people wandering the landscape. They're not allowed to root anywhere or even linger there for very long. NPR recently aired a series of stories about the fact that houseless people have a very interesting percentage of them have nomadic ancestry. And when you consider that, and then consider the history of actually making nomadicism illegal, it shines an entirely different light on houselessness. Anyway, a lot of issues were raised. And fortunately, the city council eventually agreed with the houseless group, which had swelled in numbers to a vast number of people, eventually agreed to allow them to have an acre and a half of land owned by the Department of Transportation. And it was based on a proposal where the houseless people were saying, we're pretty sure that if you let us be stable, you will actually save money, because you won't have to pay so much in crisis intervention dealing with us. We'll get out of everyone's way, and for every single woman especially, to have a place to close a door at night and not be vulnerable out in the streets will make all of the difference in the world. It's life and death for especially vulnerable people. Finally, the city council said yes. So this village began to emerge, very, very much self-governed, very much a do-it-yourself village. In fact, it's entirely built out of whatever they could find out of the waste stream. A lot of Portlanders showed up to help. They were suddenly building all of these houses made of straw, clay, insulation, and earthen plaster. It started to be absolutely beautiful. And the whole time, what people were seeing as the village was rising was evidence that all of these people actually have skills and talents and dreams too. They started to paint murals all over their houses. And, you know, it's car-free. All these people come in there with criminal records, or they're absolutely traumatized by their lives. In some cases, people who were a woman covered with cigarette burns because her parents would put cigarettes out on her when she was a baby. And that's just one of the stories that doesn't get told as people constantly vilify houseless people. I mean, the truth is they're human beings. They're somebody's baby that grew up without, mentorship or what have you. Maybe they have structural problems, structural challenges, but they all have worth. So this first village was called Dignity, and they built it themselves. And they have the lowest carbon footprint of all communities per capita in the entire city. And that was unsurprising, because it is pedestrian oriented, and they've made it themselves, so it's really a form of voluntary simplicity. They have centralized systems as opposed to everyone having their own bathrooms and kitchens. They've built things that everyone can share. But through that sharing, and also a culture of mutual responsibility, co-responsibility, they have grown their own leadership capacity. In fact, they help other villages all over the country and up into Canada to get villages started too. In fact, people pay the leaders of this village to fly places to help organize houseless people to start doing things for themselves. And I think the core principle that really applies to every neighborhood where, middle class, lower middle class, upper middle class, rich people live, is that people need to be involved in their own challenges. And if that can happen, then people can build their way through anything. Here's the craziest statistic. They have, in spite of all the people there with criminal records, some of whom have killed other people, it has the lowest crime rate in the city. And that's not just because it's car-free. That's because they live and they work together. This is a kind of a terrifying thing. But, if you read some sociological analysis, the typical American has what you call partial relationships. Like compared to our ancestors who lived and worked with other people, where they would have 100% full spectrum relationships, in our lives, some of our best relationships are about an eighth. Like your best friend that you only see occasionally, or your coworker that you kind of identify with, but you only see him at work and it never gets to go much further. Or even your most dear partnership relationship in your marriage. You're always apart until you come together. And there's so much pressure. And anyway, relationships of trust thrive when they're place-based and living and working is integrated. And in that case, crime will go through the floor and public health will go through the roof. And that's what we've seen. Right? For the people that are the proponents of this, and even the houseless people themselves, they knew going in that these things would happen. It's fantastic that they got measured and they're verifiable that crime is so low there and people have become healed. But it's really big news, and it's good news for everyone else to know that if houseless people can do that, with all of the ways that they're admittedly broken, that surely a community like a neighborhood that has so many skills and talents and experience and multi-generational community, with grandmothers there and grandfathers there and all of these children, if a neighborhood with all that power and capacity can cohere into a kind of a larger collaborative self, and I'm talking about really powerful individuals, creating things together, then anything is possible. So that's what I think the dream of this place, to me, that's what I interpret when I look at this. It's about what we're trying to get to. It's not just about the things we're eating. It's about reskilling. It's about giving people a chance to, step out of whatever intense situation that they've been involved with and engage with their hands and get grounded and rooted, gain some life lessons, get something on a resume, make friends. Like the layers and layers of this are incalculably beneficial. I want to say a few more things about projects. I do want to say about these houseless villages. They've replicated all over the city. Eventually they've become funded. Very conservative Oregon city called, I want to say at the beginning, we barely knew what we were doing in it. But one thing that was really great is we knew that we didn't know. So it was like, yay, we can't really make mistakes. Everything's an experiment. Let's just go forward and make friends, and maybe everything will work out. If we just focus on making friends, everything should work out. And we just got better and better at what we were doing. There's a whole bunch of people back in Portland that I'm connected to. They're back there doing good stuff. I'm out just wandering around, sharing stories, and making friends, and offering technical resources sometimes if people need help. But it's all just replicating back there. People have been turned on. Houseless people have had tremendous successes, and so they just keep stepping forward and saying, how about this idea? How about this idea? And finally, even the most conservative cities around Portland are saying, yes, we'll fund that. Quick action, low cost, Getting people off the streets, saving lives, let's do it. So Oregon City called and they said, we have a lot of homeless people, we have a lot of houseless people in our region, and we want to take care of all of them. But we can start with veterans. We can start with people living out in the street. And we've got about $700,000, the cost of a single family home, to work with. So, we're talking about veterans. So we got the Army and the Navy and the Air Force to come help. And we built 32 housing units and all these big buildings that are community spaces and commercial kitchen, infirmary, offices, showers, toilets, washing rooms for clothes and stuff for the cost of a single family house. And all these people became safe. And it's a DIY village itself. So they're engaged constantly in making decisions on their own behalf. And they stay there as long as they need to until they get back on their feet. Maybe they get off of some drug. They go back to their families. In the meantime, they're stable. They're not chased out. Let's be clear. Oh, here's another crazy statistic. Dignity Village especially. The average cost of a government shelter is around, in our area, is $100 a night. It's at least that here. The Dignity Village is $4 a night. $4. So we're talking about a 25th of the cost. And the difference is a shelter can be so dehumanizing that people don't even want to stay there. They don't want to be contained and confined. They're kicked out in the morning and they can only come back in the evening. They have to be divided up as couples usually. They lose their children. They can't keep their pets or their possessions. And the most beautiful thing about these houseless villages is that you keep your pets, you keep your stuff. Your family stays together. And it costs a 25th. And it grows people. Like, you get to be there for a while. You can receive your mail. You can send out emails. You can make a resume and try to get a job. You can write grants. You can be part of... what's crazy is, especially at Dignity, where we've had that story going the longest, when it comes time for a person, they're on a list and affordable housing comes open, they don't want to leave because they've made friendships for life and they've got a voice there. And even if they're going into affordable housing, this leads to kind of the next subject, housing itself. They don't want to leave because they have a voice and they're able to create there with other people. Like, what's it like to go from a place where you have a wood shop because the houseless people have made it? You have a table saw and all the tools you need to build some bird houses or a bed or whatever you want to make. To go into a really nice housing project where then you close your door and you're alone. And the hallways are more about keeping fires from happening. You'd love to put up poetry, but you can't because that's against the rules. In a houseless village, the poetry's everywhere. The poetry is the whole story of self-empowerment. So I want to touch on housing itself. I really love designing things from the ground up. I really do. But to me, that's an ecological dead end, ultimately, to just build housing that, supplants farmland. If you just even dig into the soil, you release all of this carbon, which makes things worse. And so oftentimes, housing developments are for people that we don't even know yet. What I'm really interested in personally is retrofitting the communities where we live, with infill housing, certainly with placemaking, with community spaces and gardens like this. I really want to re-village neighborhoods. To me, neighborhoods their destiny is to become villages on our terms. That's how I see it. So I don't want to create entirely new landscapes. And if they are, then they need to be places where people will thrive together. If you have, my friend Eli Spivak, who's a developer, I can actually say he's my favorite developer because he goes into a situation intending to cultivate relationships and create conditions where people will thrive. So it's possible to create new things that are so attractive that people just really want to be there. They want to raise their children there. The truth is about Eli's work, there are lists and lists of people who can't wait for his next project to happen. And his projects are what you call co-housing. So people want to live in a place where they own their own place, whether it's separate from all the other places or together in two, duplexes or triplexes or fourplexes. Usually Eli's creating a mix of triplexes and then single units. Some of them are dinky. Some of them are as big as 1,300 square feet. But there's the entire landscape is for children to play. And there's food growing everywhere, even in the setbacks around the perimeter. You come into the village underneath an arbor that either has kiwis or grapes, or at least passion flowers growing. And the entire landscape is a demonstration project of permaculture. There's so much that he'll do as a developer, and then he hands the community, the people that come in to live there and own their own place, he hands them a map created by permaculturists for how they can continue to work on it by installing water catchment. The swales are already there, the orchards are already there, all the hookups are there for solar panels, so he leaves a lot for people to still choose to do and invest in. But he's focused on affordability. He puts a significant amount of the housing onto land trust. So the housing that sits on that land trust is tied to local income, and it can never be sold for more than a certain percentage of local, like lower than median income, and can only be sold, for instance, to families or first-time buyers. So he's one of the most conscientious developers in the city, and he intends to create places, I know he doesn't think of it as his legacy, but well before this guy dies in about 40 years, he's one of the most beloved people. He's a developer, and people love him all over the city. In fact, we put him in charge of, he's in charge of the design commission. He reviews everything. So if you intend to build a place that's going to isolate people, you're going to get pushback from our friend Eli. So you go to one of his places, and it's filled with people who really want to be there. Now, of course, there's barriers to ownership. Let's not fool ourselves at all about that. But he works in infill situations. If there's a derelict property that isn't worth, restoring, then he'll take that down and he'll put in a whole bunch of housing that all relates beautifully to the neighborhood at a human scale and internally, with interesting pathways, gateways, village center, workshops, a place to build things and teach kids. The last project we did with him involved a hempcrete community sauna, and that was 24 homes, 24 families, with glorious front porches. Co-housing communities always have wonderful porches right on the public space, so that as people are doing things outside, people can be in their own private space and interact and invite people in. So it's a really what you might call a convivial place, not a place of isolation. So we've been involved in a lot of those. One of the projects that we're working on, we have this architecture office and planning office that is always guided by permaculture. One of the latest ones is to create a village that is nestled into orchards. It's what's called an agrihood. There are some stories of golf courses that have failed where housing is put in and also agricultural systems. So the people who live there basically come in knowing that part of their livelihood and their sustenance will be that they will be involved in the farming of their own residential area. So these are, I'm just naming that because this is happening and people should know about it. It's possible. When you hear people talking about, you sense that they need an idea, you can tell them about this kind of thing. These things are actually happening. You can look them up on the internet. There's articles that are being written about them. So one of my favorite eco-villages in a city, I showed yesterday at a slide presentation, it's called Kailash Eco-Village. And this is a case where an existing apartment building of about 30 units was purchased by a couple, and they have become the benefactors of land and residential space so that people can come in. It's a rental model. People can come in and live there, have an apartment and be part of the community. They began by tearing up almost all of the asphalt to create, to open up space for gardens. They did a quick remediation of the land using mushrooms and microecology, and then promptly, huh? Yeah, Paul's an inspiration for everybody up there. And whether people are growing mushrooms in their basement or, healing the landscape, he's such an inspiration. I mean, his whole organization, because it's more than just him. There's lots of people. So yeah, opening up the land. If you ever come to Portland, Oregon, please go to Kailash Eco Village. A lot of permaculture communities can be pretty hairy looking because they're just trying to do too much all at once. They haven't figured out how to phase it and really take care of it. Go to Kailash. That place is one of the most superbly organized communities. The gardens are robust, beautifully tended, and also this group of people has a lot of people with some skill sets. This is one of the craziest stories from Portland, Oregon lately, and I'm scarcely able to believe it. But this apartment building had been practicing, this apartment turned co-housing community had been practicing humanure, taking out their toilets and putting in bucket-based systems, and then having humanure composting systems on their site at a huge community scale. I mean, 30 families is pretty big to be handling all of that. And the leader of that initiative, his name is Ole Erison. And if somehow the city found out that Ole was leading all these people in illegal pooping, and they came to the site, and they already know as they're arriving that they're going to end up legalizing it, because that's what this guy does in the city. Whether it's water catchment or other kind of biologically based things that needed to have a city ordinance to legalize them, Ole just keeps coming into the bureaucracy and just making sense. Like they go onto their knees. I'm not kidding. This guy is so broadly respected. So they've legalized pooping in a bucket in Portland, Oregon as your primary human waste system. Like you can take out your toilet and have a bucket as long as your composting system meets the requirements. And there is some amount of testing and some amount of inspection that has to happen at least for the first few kind of annual cycles. So it's not entirely off-grid stuff, but they can do it as a whole community too. And they save their urine. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this yet, but urine, this is one of the things you learned in a permaculture class. The ground wants us to pee on it because our urine is full of nitrogen, and plants just really groove on nitrogen. So this community saves their urine, there's huge tanks of it, and it's just sitting there, and it gets mixed with water and dispensed into compost. And then the compost is applied to the ground. And the way that the ratio by which you mix this and apply it could burn the plants if it was too intense. And so they're very careful about how they do it, but their gardens are unbelievably abundant because they're giving the plants a lot of what a lot of what they want. So that's the story of a miracle. And part of the miracle is, first of all, you go there, and a lot of people wouldn't want to really help because they don't own it. Right? Like a lot of people would say, I'm not given to this. But when you go there, it's really clear that everybody's giving to this. And as you're walking around, you're walking under squash tunnels. Have you ever seen one of those? You put this kind of big wire frame. It's like a fence, but you've curved it and you've made it into a tunnel, and all these pumpkins and squash and tomatoes are growing up onto it. You're walking through a tunnel of food around the site. The beauty compels people to be involved for sure, but it's part of being clear with people, the conditions, like you can be here, you can live here, your apartment only costs $600. If you put in 20 hours a month, and all of these different positions rotate, so sometimes you're part of a council and sometimes you're doing some maintenance or working in the garden. So clear expectations and clear organizational structure, really attainable costs to be able to get in. So that's just one of the stories. I could touch on a whole bunch more, but I should probably pause for a second and just see what might be coming up for people. There might be some things that you're already doing or thinking about that you'd like to mention before I yammer on anymore about a whole bunch more wonderful things. Go ahead.
For those of you who don't know, 616 Gray Street is in the county, it's not in the city. So for Bakersfield, there's a lot of county islands. It's not homogeneous polygon. So when it comes to change, creative placemaking, permaculture, you have to determine political jurisdiction. And if you're interested in advocating for change, if you live in the city of Bakersfield, I can't speak to the county right now, the city of Bakersfield has the majority of the population of the county, even though, so a county of 1 million, about 400,000 live in the city, the rest is spread around 10 other cities and many corporations. But the city of Bakersfield is asking these questions, the ones that Mark said, what do you want to see? What type of businesses do you want? Where do you want housing located? Tell us. We're asking for feedback because a year or so, they started an update to the Bakersfield General Plan. The city of California cannot do development unless it has a legal general plan in place. The one they have now is old. I think it was approved in 2001 or 2002. Pretty good idea. This one is called Bakersfield 2045. That's Google. Bakersfield 2045. Rise. They have face-to-face meetings. They have Zoom meetings. Right now, so I've attended quite a bit and gave my input, but right now they have a draft housing element up for public review. If you're interested, they want comment. One of the biggest things that Bakersfield is pushing, I think Blue Zone, is ADUs. I assume Portland has it. ADUs, accessory dwelling units, which means if you have a house in a parcel, assuming it's big enough, you can add on a ADU. And I think they're detached, to my knowledge. And an ADU means a granny home or a little place for another person to live. You could rent it out, or it could be whatever. It's relative. So that would help with the housing population, the housing insecurity that we currently have. So, this is the time to do it. My concern is that a lot of people are not getting back to the city. I don't know why, or why the advocacy or the input is so low, but they've been advertising. They have a lot of publicity out there. The other thing I was going to mention, that when it comes to food insecurity, the city and the county have food deserts. And I think everybody knows what a food desert is. And it appears the state of California has tools. Now, when we did the Kern County Food Policy Council some time back, I think we had one of our wants, or what we like to do, kind of a wish list, bucket list that we want to see. And it's been about 7 or 10 years ago, the state of California passed the Urban Agricultural Incentive Zones Act. This act authorizes the city, county, or landowner to enter into a contract to restrict the use of vacant, unimproved, or otherwise blighted lands for small-scale production of agricultural crops and animal husbandry. And you have to be at least a tenth of an acre up to 3 acres. And so there's a lot of land, a lot of parcels in the city that meet that criteria that's underdeveloped or not being utilized for much of anything. And they get a tax break because if you're in the state of California, your property tax is very low if it's zoned agriculture. But if it's industrial and commercial, you're going to be paying more. But if you're not doing anything with it, right now, There's a lot of commercial places that are not doing much of anything because of the way the economy is. You could have that converted. So all these tools are out there. You know, if you want more tools, read the Food Policy Council strategic plan assessment. But I'm just saying we need people to advocate because question to you, Mark, how did you get Portland's political attention? Was there an advocacy group or a particular nonprofit, or I recommend people show up to city council meetings. And I know people are doing it. Show up to county board supervisor meetings. Show up and make your point. Become educated before going there regarding creative placemaking, permaculture, food insecurity. Just kind of a thought. So, how did Portland do all these things? Somebody must have been talking to somebody, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of different layers of kind of an answer to that question.
One of them is that in our city, in the 60s and 70s, when there was a lot of momentum for making change, for some reason in our city, there were people that were focused on creating public spaces, community spaces. So we did things like stop a freeway in order to, well, first of all, it started off by defending a neighborhood from being really devastated by the expansion of a freeway. So people kind of rose up in opposition to something that was going to be devastating. But that created an organizational kind of capacity. And because of the spirit of the time, where people were really interested in being in community with each other, in our city, there was an idea to embed the new awareness in permanent forms, in permanent infrastructure. So we didn't just stop a freeway, we took a freeway out and put in a mile-long People's Park along the waterfront that became this giant festival setting for all kinds of things. And since then we've had this annual community festival that brings people together every year. It also took the form of, and this was the most important big move, well, maybe there was 3 of them. We stopped that freeway and we had billions of dollars sitting there, and we decided to instead use the funding. We were able to get consent to do this, to instead build this fabulous mass transit infrastructure that included bike lanes, but max trains, local trains, streetcars, and we even made skateboarding a form of legitimate commuting transportation, so people can skateboard really everywhere on the streets and sidewalks. And it wasn't possible on the streets before. So that led to a kind of an opening of people's minds about what was possible and how I think it taught the city, the residents of the city and the political culture, that we could actually intend to make changes that seemed impossible, and we enjoyed it. So then we started to kind of just sort of stomp all over our own place with one project success after another. So we got started early, but it was that radicalism of the time where people were, I remember as a kid that people were saying, what good is public space, or what good is freedom of assembly without a place to assemble? And that's what's resonating in me as a kid that grew up in that. I'm still wanting to answer that question with, community space is really available everywhere for that voice. So, we had to put in political leaders. We had to put in people that were faithful to community goals. Leaders. One of the big moves also, besides this, did I mention the public square? We created this public square that is the heart of the city. And when that was created, we had this spectacular community space. And the struggle that we went through to create that community space was almost like the way that a satellite probe, Voyager, goes out and whips around a planet to get more speed. The conflict over our public square, where the mayor was trying to kill it, whipped the momentum even faster, because he said some of the most stupid things you could ever imagine. He said, I'm not going to let, he said this on the news, in a public forum. He said, if I let you create that public square, then you'll gather. And people were so upset and outraged that literally that weekend we came out, I was a child and got to be part of this. everybody brought all this paint, and we painted the rooftop of this 2-story parking garage where the public square was supposed to go. We did this radical act, and the mayor pulled up in his car, and while he was yelling at people and telling them to stop, we actually painted his car very rapidly. And he was so upset. I mean, he became the most unpopular pariah that we drove out of office in the next election cycle. He defunded the public square, and when you go to that public square and you walk on the surface, you can notice that every brick has a name of an individual or a family that donated to the project in order to pay for the square. So him trying to stop it led to even more community power. The advent of the neighborhood association is a way that we grow leaders. And here's actually, when you asked that question, here's one of the first answers that came to my mind. Our neighborhood associations aren't just places where people become protectionist, and try to stop change, which sometimes is a good thing they're doing. They actually have a real voice. Like projects come to them for review before they get approved. They've had that land use review function since the early 70s. So they have a real weight to their voice. It's taken a long time for them to be proactive and to start addressing things more creatively instead of just reacting. But to have that infrastructure in the city has helped to radicalize the whole city. It's helped to make the bureaucracy start to learn, and it's meant that we've been able to grow leaders and elect them to the city council. I mean, right now we have by far the most progressive city council we've ever had. It's significant to have half of the council being African American, and I think there's only one white male. There's 2 white males, one of them's gay. So the diversification of the political leadership is evidence of an increasingly progressive kind of sense of access, because everyone except the mayor himself, and he's a bit of a complex character, has come out of the community, leadership kind of constellation. So the truth is we've really grown the capacity ourselves, and we haven't stopped. We've kept on it, and it just keeps reaping more and more benefits. Yeah.
How do you vet them?
How do we vet them?
Yeah, how you deem who's trustworthy, who's worthy for that position?
Yeah, great question. Well, they go through rounds. They have to be part of debates, public debates. And because they're coming out of the community, a lot of people already kind of know their background. I don't think anybody, no, there's one guy who was, a couple guys who got onto the city council in the last few years that are not true community leaders. So it's possible, like if you have enough money and a lot of advertising, it's possible to still get on there. But really good people like Joanne Hardesty, she's a very powerful African-American leader who's been, working at the grassroots level since maybe the 80s. And we elevated her to be a city commissioner. And everybody knew who she was. I mean, we've done projects with her. We've supported her community initiatives. So, somebody like her is really raised by all the collaboration she's been a part of.
Elaborate more on what the public squares look like at the intersections. What do they consist of?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Those are my favorite projects. Let me say something about how they happen in order to tell you what they look like. So the Department of Transportation has made it so that it's really easy to create one of these public squares in an intersection. At first, because everybody was kind of scared of what they thought was a new idea, they made 16 square blocks agree to do this, which is a whole lot of work for somebody. And after the first one did that, and we came in at 96% approval, the threshold was 80%. We hit 96%. They made it easier so that the next intersection painting that happened, let's see, they only made the 2 streets that are intersecting, the people that just lived on those 2 streets, not like all the people out here, only they had to sign. Everybody's invited into the process of designing this. And then, a few projects later, they made it so that only the people living at the intersections needed to sign. So they reduced the burden of getting consent from the neighbors to only those four houses. And they didn't even have to be the owners, just the renters, or the owners if they live there. So they kept making it easier and easier. They want to incentivize this. And one reason why is because crime, traffic accidents literally lower because all of these people are connected and talking and creating something together. So for one thing, you're rolling back their fear of each other. But what they look like comes from the people there. There's no like palette where like you select a design and then that's what you get. Every design is unique to the people who live there. So what we like to do is encourage everyone to reach out in a radius of 2 blocks all the way around. Flyer them, email them, call them, however you organize it. The people who love to do community organizing will reach out to the people that are there around that spot. And the spot is identified by the neighbors. Like they call our organization or they call the Department of Transportation, and then transportation will refer them to us. And then basically we're this nonprofit that coaches people in how to just reach out in their own community and find their capacity. So what happens is a potluck. And all these people come because they're excited and interested. There's a whole lot of talking, there's a whole lot of eating, and maybe in one potluck you somehow come up with a design. Like in the Sunnyside neighborhood, everybody agreed in the first potluck, let's put a giant sunflower down in the street. And I'm talking about a sunflower so big, it connected all the corners. And they had the Fibonacci spirals of all the seeds, perfectly created, all around that space when they finally, put it on the street. But they needed artists. They needed people who could lay out the lines. And so they were reaching out and finding, there's contractors all over the neighborhood. There's artists, there's musicians. So, they handed in their design to the Department of Transportation. They, easily permitted it. The insurance is just covered. And that's getting easier and easier. You used to have to get a block party permit, and that was kind of difficult, and now it's easy for everybody to do. So they kept making it easier and easier. But on the day that they installed that giant sunflower, they also had a giant potluck and a big, kind of festival where like high school kids that are, in a band come out and play, and then adults who are professionals come out and play, and everybody's dancing in the street. So that's what a barn raising, really is. It's doing work together where a few people know how to do it and other people are learning from them. And then when it comes to the food, like people have been learning from others and helping. And then when it comes to the music, a whole lot of people are actually learning. Sometimes you're learning how to play an instrument like a drum while everybody else is playing. It's always about reskilling and sharing, so that at the end of the thing, everybody feels tremendous, like the world has changed. And at the start of the day, it looked like the street you lived with your whole life. And at the end of the day, all these people that you didn't even know lived around you are sitting there dancing in the street, and you're seeing the skills and talents. But you're just seeing the surface. You're just scratching the surface of the tremendous capacity of the neighborhood. So the answer to your question is, it looks different every single time. It's always I would say it's a different metaphor. And it's always what everyone agrees they want to create. So it has a huge emotional impact that costs very little money and is installed in one day. And because it's not a mural on a building, but it's on a surface, even the littlest kids, like take that little child that was here a little while ago and give him a brush and just let him work away at the space. And ever after, they're going to identify with that location and say, I helped create that. And that's a thing that everybody takes away. I don't want to stop anyone from asking a question, but I could go on about this for a long time. And let me say this. If you just get a bunch of guys together, who have done like high school sports, and they're all competitive, they're kind of wanting their way, they want it their turn, but you put men into a situation with children and also women, their sisters, their grandmothers, their moms, suddenly I call it a villager capacity, just clicks on, and everybody starts to be able to collaborate. There's always some, kind of old dude who talks more than their share, that's for sure. So you kind of have to manage that person sometimes. And sometimes it doesn't happen at all, and it's just graceful. But it can be the most beautiful process. And this is my favorite part of it. I'm sitting here going like this, watching all these people start to talk, and they're hesitant. They don't feel like they can speak. They don't feel like anyone might listen to them. Like that's what they're used to feeling in their job or in school, their conditioning. But I know, because I've been through this before, that in a half an hour, everybody's body language is going to get softer. They're going to kind of forget that they're afraid, or they're going to forget their projections and just get really interested. And it helps to have children there because you're trying to get them involved. You're trying to get them. There's something about it that unfolds like a flower that is the most beautiful process. So I'm not just talking about Portland. It's such a beautiful process. It's all over the state of Oregon, and it's in all of these other cities, including Los Angeles, San Diego, all the way up to Sebastopol and Arcata. So people are doing this kind of thing. The Portland bureaucracies are answering inquiries like literally all the time. There's a person at the Department of Transportation in Portland whose job it is to just provide assistance to other cities that are trying to get this started. So it's been a wonderful thing to see people waking up and going, oh my God, I'm in a development. There's nowhere to come together and get going on it. And then it starts to replicate in their own town. So I just want to be clear, like, creating community space is an issue for everyone. And I think, just like I was saying about English Ivy, in the absence of our community engagement, all these things sort of spiral and go, you might say go wrong. One of those things is that Americans think they don't have anything in common, and it's easy to be divided politically by what's playing out in the news when you're not used to engaging in real issues where you live. So this is one of the most fascinating things in my community. We've been doing this stuff for 27 years in the neighborhood where I live. And even though I'm quite sure that there have been individuals who have had issues with each other, I can't imagine there haven't been. But on a community level, there isn't fighting. I would like a good fight. I'd like there to be some huge issue. But it's such a loose and flexible way that people create together. In fact, it doesn't really even have an organizational structure. It's just that someone says, okay, I'll host the potluck this time if that's okay. People come and bring food. Here's the beautiful thing. The best community organizing, and you can quote this on my grave, the best community organizing has a wonderful balance where you minimize the talking and all the thinking and organizing, and you maximize the creative output. You maximize, the production or the creativity. So in my community, our meetings are always around food. Kids are usually running around, and then they're off doing their own community building with each other. And then what we're doing is always figuring out a way to facilitate something wonderful to happen. And then we get to enjoy it. And it costs almost nothing because everybody's bringing their folding table or their chairs or their plates of food. Like, there's almost no budget. And if there is, like to pay for the painting, like a family will be able to give $5, another one will be able to give 20 or 50. Nobody's given a whole lot, but it all adds up to way more than enough. And we see that really in every neighborhood of any economic standing. So these projects are designed to replicate, and that's the point. Like, it's all about people making it their own. So what unites us is the principles. It's the idea of community power in public space. And then it takes endlessly diverse expressions every single time. That's a lot of talking. Anybody have a thing that they would add? Does anybody want to say something about this particular garden and what it does for you, or what you'd like to see happen here? Or
This is my first time being here, and I'm really impressed with it. And I'm glad that this is here, and I wish that this projects like this spread all over our county.
May it be so. Yeah. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I would just like to expound upon your encouragement to people to not be afraid to go out there and try to get a piece of land that isn't being taken care of or isn't being used for some positive way in the community. Because as hard to get through to the bureaucracy can seem like it is, if you just have some persistence and you have a really strong idea, you might surprise yourself with what the opportunity you have. That's how we got Okihi ended up with a 14-acre project right on the river. Because we took a chance and followed through with it, and we got surprised by it working out. And I know just from going through the process that the county in particular, I don't know about the city, but the county has a lot of properties that are more of a liability to them because nothing's happening on them, because they're not being used. So they're waiting for the right idea to come along and to take advantage of that. So if you've ever had that idea, or I don't know, don't be afraid to go get it and try to make something happen, because you never know what might be available to you as you try. I appreciate your inspiration too today. It was just a real inspiring story, and excited to take that in our project.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I want to give a little testimony about the benefits.
I always kind of figured that doing community work, bringing people together, would help relationships to form. Like, people would meet partners, they'd fall in love with each other. Just kind of, that was an expectation. Damn it, if I'm going to be involved in activism, it's got to result in that kind of beautiful thing to happen. And I have seen, children come out of this in many cases, and more than I would know. So that's lovely. And then people deciding to be housemates, people finding work. One of the most amazing things is to see projects get incubated. Like, if these two people hadn't met painting an intersection or whatever it was, then this other organization wouldn't have emerged. So, I just got to say, I was saying earlier about, building community has been the whole point. Like, we're creating these conducive conditions for people to just basically say, hi, this is my name, who are you? And whether it's a community garden or any other kind of setting, if you can just help that to happen, then all this stuff has a chance. So that's how this organization, I don't know if you've heard of it, called Free Geek. It's a computer recycling nonprofit that's gone global. Free Geek, so computer geeks. And in one of our events, a person with a whole lot of computers to unload met somebody who was really wishing they could find a bunch of computers, and out of that came this nonprofit, social justice nonprofit actually. If you can volunteer 8 hours to just help out, then you are now qualified to receive your own recycled computer, and you get trained in how to use it and even maintain it. And then it comes with a warranty. So, it's, if you have some time, the barriers are removed. You can get access to your own system. And out of that comes this incredible community of free geeks that have created, iterations of this in cities all the way as far away as South Africa. And that came out of that situation. I could sit here listing one thing after another. I'll mention DPAVE. DPAVE, that's an organization where people get together and basically tear up asphalt and concrete to open up the ground to make gardens, play spaces, bioswales, just tear up streets, and they just love smashing stuff. There's people out there who just no meetings for me, I just want to smash. We got these great photos. I wish I would have brought some today, but yeah, all these high school football players looking for something to do, you focus them, smash that. And the people, there's this global arts gathering called the Venice Biennale, and they heard about this. It's huge, snooty organization in Venice every year. I mean, every 2 years. And they loved the idea of DPAVE so much, they gave it this International Arts Award for performance art. Like, anyway, people love that thing. Anyway, incubating more initiatives. That's the coolest thing about a place like this. You bring people together and like, it's just so wonderful to sit there knowing that more things are happening as a result of it than you ever intended. So to have it keep going and going and going, it keeps inspiring more and more things to happen. That's definitely been true for us. Yeah. I don't want to like keep you guys here all day, but I could sit here telling you one story after another. Okay, I'll tell you another one. We have a fleet of these nomadic vehicles that go around the city, and the first one was called the T-Horse. And there's been a lot of different iterations, but it's a gathering place built on a truck, and it's outfitted with a canopy made out of all recycled materials, and when it's lit up at night, it glows, and it goes to parking lots and parks and block parties and stuff, wherever people call. Like, you know, if somebody calls us and says, hey, we want to start building community, but we don't have a community space, they'll call for the T-Horse. And the T-Horse brings people out of their homes to see what in the world is going on. So it's a truck, but it looks like a gigantic butterfly with wings made of bamboo. Part of that's because Portland gets some rain, and we want to keep people dry while they're sitting on these Persian rugs and pillows that are all around the truck. So these wings extend out from the truck all around you, and the two biggest are these gigantic butterfly wings. So we've mothballed that for a while because people invented the T-Bike as a kind of sustainability demonstration project. The T-Crab, which is a bike-based thing that unfolds and looks like a giant crab. The T-Palace, believe it or not, of course, the T-Rex, the T-Goat, all these different ideas because people kept getting excited about creating a new form for a nomadic gathering. But finally we brought the T-Horse out again, and what it does is it goes around and serves free chocolate cake and drinks. So if it's cold out, it's hot drinks. If it's hot out, it's cold drinks. And people know that the T-Horse is there. I mean, literally, if they see it, most Portlanders will pull over and come over to it because they're likely to see some friends and be able to get free treats. And if people are coming to the T-Horse, they're usually bringing something to share. So this thing is a nomadic intervention that moves around the city, and the idea is just over and over again, create these conditions, even if it's only for 3 hours, for people to meet other people and make friends. And then it removes itself and goes to another location. And this is the coolest thing. I hope you guys do this sometime. So our T-Horse goes around the city having these events one at a time in a huge circle, and then it links all of those places together in a circle of people holding hands for 1 minute at a certain sort of date of the year. And I'm telling you about that story because basically anyone can have an amazing idea to bring people together. And if you got all this rage inside you and you want to challenge the system, the T-Horse is a very beautiful way to do that. Like, okay, I get it. A lot of our communities are designed to leave us voiceless and feeling powerless. I totally defy that, you know, with this beautiful initiative. Like in the case of the truck, we were like, damn, this is going to work. Like, what else is going to get an American off the couch but a giant butterfly-shaped mobile tea house serving chocolate cake for free? Come on now. So that, like, we were like, that's ridiculous. Let's do it. And yeah, it's been going for 27 years. So maybe I'll just pause there, unless anybody has a thing to add or bring up.
I did conversation went everywhere yesterday, but I was really curious about what some of the children that have grown up in this environment, what they're up to.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's an amazing question, because for me, when I started this, I committed to it long term. And I wasn't able to foresee how wonderful the answer to that question would be. I didn't even know that question. I knew this though. I looked around and I was like, you know what, every single form of activism that I see, almost every one, doesn't have elders. People seem to check out for some reason or other. And it seems to me that what's really missing is continuity. Like if people don't have continuity, then people will come in having this revelation about getting involved, and then they might repeat the same things that other people tried that maybe don't work, you know, or are a dead end. Or maybe in an elder position, you might be in a position to direct some resources to help, you know, and just be available. Not tell people what to do, but just be there to support, and maybe that would be enough. So when I have seen people become multi-generational, it, like, even conflict reduces, because you finally get to this place of stability where you've been doing it for a while. And the most beautiful thing I've seen has been children grow up inside of these kinds of environments and processes with a whole different chance. Like in my neighborhood, seriously challenged, lower income neighborhood, a lot of people on fixed incomes, families with like structural development challenges, the houses are really small and modest, and they were never designed to last very long. And the children have grown up from being babies feeling like the world was theirs, because they're out in the street painting, or they're in the public space harvesting raspberries, you know, or harvesting like the walnuts coming off of their neighbors' trees that are falling into the street, and neighbors are out there gathering them, and the children are learning how to dry the walnuts. Kids are learning about plant identification, like all this stuff that makes them feel powerful. So I've seen children grow up and go into like city government, and suddenly they're change makers inside of the bureaucracy. Yeah, I've seen children like institute like new organizational structures and nonprofits. Every one of those kids makes a difference. That generation comes in and it's a new game in whatever context they go into. Yeah, I've seen that happen.
Wasn't there a girl that got a full ride somewhere and then decided to go back home with it?
Yeah, Jane. Jane's kind of an unusual kid anyway. I met her when she was 17, and she kept wanting to go for walks with me and sit down and buy me a Americano or something. And it was just really interesting. I think I was about 45 and she was 17, and I just was, you know, making it really clear that, you know, this is not a romantic thing, you know, as if you'd need to say that to a 17-year-old girl. But that wasn't her interest. She was just really wanting to know more. She just has this insatiable curiosity. So she's a really interesting kid. Like I'd be walking with her and we're talking about something, and she'll just suddenly stop and say, "Oh my God, we exist." She's like, "This is the coolest. I have fingers." Like, so brilliant kid. Anyway, Jane got a scholarship to William and Mary College on the East Coast, and she was back there about 6 months, and she's like, God, like she was there to study sustainability, and she's like, I already know more than the professors from living in my neighborhood where we've been planting all these gardens all the time. So she gave up her scholarship, and she started to do this incredible initiative. Like literally, she's a totally self-educating powerhouse. Like one of the things that she did was she came back to her neighborhood, and maybe if she hadn't gone to William and Mary, she wouldn't have quite understood it this way. But she said to me, my neighborhood is a library of all of these stories. So she would walk up to people's doors and just knock and introduce herself and start a conversation. And eventually that led to knowing something about the person and their skills and their interests. So she would offer to do some sort of collaboration. That's especially true of like elder women or, you know, single mothers or something. who could relate to her and she felt safe with. But she learned like how to make shoes, how to make paper, how to make books. And you know, pretty quickly she would convert that into, well, very quickly she converted it into teaching other people. So she always took whatever she was learning and tried to use it to reskill others. And then eventually she was turning it into her own like book binding business, and she was making artwork. I mean, she just, like every 4 years, it's like she's reinvented herself into a whole new skill set. Currently, like she's in the field of medicine. So, you know, she's a bit unusual, absolutely off the charts. But the lesson of Jane is that all the knowledge, all the learning is really surrounding you already in your neighborhood. You know, while people go off somewhere to like burden themselves with the cost of an education, it would remain free to tap into your own community and just organically grow and learn. And that's kind of the lesson of Jane. And I think everyone can be like Jane. It's just maybe she got a great start. Something helped her to have confidence when she was a little girl. Yeah, amazing.
Oh, I love that. My neighborhood is a library. That's dope. Beautiful.
Yeah.
More reason to create more of those spaces to inspire the next generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those building blocks, spaces like this.
Yeah. You know, for other cases, I want to say about my young friend Santiago. That kid scared me when he was growing up. He was disrespectful to his parents. He sometimes would take a swing at his dad. And this is when he was a little kid. But Santiago also hosted the biggest birthday party I've ever seen out in the streets. And his mom and other moms would build this giant piñata every year. One of my favorites was they made a Roman centurion so that they could all just smash it together. But they would, you know, have this giant party out in the streets. And so he was always into community, even though he wouldn't listen to people. And this kid was talented. He was the most handsome kid. So you're kind of worried about him because like he might be really arrogant and narcissistic. I thought that was the way he was going. But he's just kept being in this community setting, connected to the other kids around him. And now I'm just so pleased the way that he treats me. He'll always come up and he's respectful, and he asks other people how they're doing, and he's sincerely interested. And he is brilliant. He's a brilliant kid. His opportunities are through the roof. But part of what happened for him is he got to grow into a really fine human being, really present with people. And all the things his parents cared about, all the sort of social justice edges of his parents, you know, a lot of kids will reject that stuff and walk away. I think for a long time he felt alienated and didn't understand. His mom is awesome, his dad is awesome, and now finally he sees it, and he's really embraced the legacy of his family. So that's a really great success story. You know, I hold that in mind when I hear stories of like kids falling through the cracks, going unmentored, falling into drugs and violence and stuff. Like what's being lost is that kind of capacity, I think, that is in every kid. So this community building stuff, painting the street, you know, planting pollinator supporting flowers along the right of way, like all of that is about growing kids to their capacity.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, anybody else have? Could you, do you have like just a ballpark estimate of how many kids in your neighborhood, or like what percentage are in public school versus like, you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, versus say like a more privileged private school or something?
No, or homeschool,
Oh, homeschool.
or like
Okay.
what is the education paradigm like in your neighborhood?
Yeah. I'm really happy to tell you
That you would ask, because I want to network with him after to discuss that.
yeah. I'm really pleased to tell you I know a lot of the stories as I think over these kids. I only know of 2 kids who have any private schooling, going on, and those are kindergartners. Most of the kids are going to public schools, and we got all kinds of budgetary problems, class size issues, but we have a very engaged, like, parental culture in Southeast Portland where we live. So I would say, but during COVID, very beautifully, people created a series of small schoolhouses in backyards, like repurposed sheds and garages, where the kids of the neighborhood were actually being taught in a rotation by parents and other adults. So, like, there was this, one of the women in our neighborhood runs the what's it called? The frisbee-based sport.
Oh, disc golf, the frisbee golf.
No, it's like out in the fields, competitive. Shoot. Anyway, she runs that program for the city. Frisbee competition. Anyway, so she was guiding the kids in their recreational stuff, and swinging in to do that like 2 or 3 times a week. And then there's obviously people that can teach English and math. So the kids would get mentorship from their own community through the pandemic. And some families disengaged entirely into that shared homeschooling dynamic, because then everyone could be in their own kind of pod, which then connected those families into a really tight overall pod. But that was a beautiful initiative. But I think most kids are not homeschooling, but we do have in the neighborhood a kind of a whole homeschooling thing for families. Like, we go on walks to do nature, plant identification, and to study ecology. So every now and then someone will organize a field trip, and it's usually in our own neighborhood, so the kids are learning more about where they live. So there's some initiatives like that that are specifically focused on kids, that are kind of homeschooling oriented. Yeah.
Thank you.
I heard some of your talks. You're talking about in the '90s, like how it was Portland was a lot more conservative of a city, and you've only been here 2 days, but I was wondering if you feel there's like parallels to how Bakersfield is now and is emerging to what Portland was back then, and potential that we could one day be similar to that in village building and creating spaces and placemaking.
Yeah. Well, the answer is absolutely yes, that Bakersfield can, because I've seen it over and over, that people can create
momentum, and they can transform where they live. I have no doubt of that. One thing that gives me faith is that the issues that you are facing here are exactly parallel to the issues that we were facing there. And whether it's the chicken ordinance that got smacked down, or any number of other things, we have faced the same culture of no every single time. Having the first few victories on a community level feels good to everybody. And one of the things that you should aspire to as you're changing Bakersfield is to help the bureaucrats actually feel good. Even if it's just meeting with them, honestly, like sitting down with them and bringing our humanity to the table. Like, by that I mean we come bringing a need-based initiative that's grounded in the goals and objectives that are already on the city's website. For them to say no to it is quite absurd. So we bring a proposal. We don't just talk about it. We bring it in an organized format. It's the kind of it's the kind of thing that they're used to doing. So when you put it in a format that they're used to working with, you're translating it to them. And if you don't effectively translate, you're never going to go anywhere. So how do you build a bridge or create a link through translating your initiative? So by translating, you're helping them to identify with what you're trying to do. You're trying to help them to relate to it and be able to say yes to it. So the no's that you're getting are the same kind of no's that we faced. But after the first few victories, they started to learn that they could actually say yes. and they became more receptive. That first project that we did where we painted the street, it did start off as an illegal guerrilla initiative, and it just delighted us, and it delighted them too, honestly. But they would act like it made them mad, and I think some of them were mad. I think they were frustrated because we had defied their authority. You know, we said, hey, we got this idea. They said, no way. And we were like, well, that's like just going home and like putting handcuffs on ourselves. Like we know this is possible and it's a good idea. So we did it anyway. And then they were mad. But then the mayor herself said, this will become legal. Coolest thing in the world, one of the coolest things, was the mayor looking at a picture of what she did and of what we had done. And she's like, this is in our city? And there were so many questions she could have asked, but she's like, who's giving you a problem? Because we're standing there in her office with this picture. She knew someone was giving us a problem. Like, it's the coolest thing ever to tell on the Department of Transportation to the mayor, like the most powerful person in the history of Oregon, mayor of our city. And she's like, she turns to the ombudsman. Everybody should know there's an ombudsman in your city. They're capable of anything. Like that's their job, to be superwoman or superman. So she turns to this giant guy named Michael and she's like, Michael, shut down transportation right now. Give these people a chance to give a presentation to the city council. Something extraordinary has happened in our city and we want to know more about it. She takes us into her, I'm going tangential here, but she takes us into the side room of her office and she's like, these are all these reports that are just gathering dust. Where all these people, neighborhoods, citywide, countywide, statewide, people keep coming up with these goals that then just get put on a shelf. She's like, go through all of these. You got an hour. Go through all of these, and then we'll go from, you go through these and look at the benchmarks, which are the goals and objectives. Gather all those. Write them down on a piece of paper. We need the language. We need your language. We need you to tell us what you're doing in terms of these. So identify these. What are you hitting on? What pistons are you hitting here? And then I will become your political advocate and we will know how to talk about this. And in 1 hour, we'll go to the city attorney. This is how fast this thing turned. So an hour later, we had all of this paper written on. We go into the city lawyer, this lady named Linda, and she's like, Linda, make this legal. This is the thing. We don't know because we live at the community level, but that's how powerful the executive of the city is. They have the power to say yes and make something legal. Now there's different political structures. On some issues you got to get city council consent, but once the mayor decides that something is going to be legal, that's pretty much how it goes, especially when they're cool. So the mayor says to the city lawyer, make this legal. So they draft up the ordinance, and then the mayor goes to the different city commissioners that are on the city council, and the whole damn thing is legalized for everyone to do from that point forward. So that's how it can turn on a dime. But the thing that I've seen over and over again, which is like what takes Bakersfield a while, is that people don't realize that you can always propose ideas. And you don't go to the front desk of a bureaucracy, you go to the political advocate that might represent your area. And that hopefully is the city council. It could be the neighborhood association, but you don't start with somebody you know nothing about. You try to have a relationship. And if you don't have a relationship, then you find someone in your community that does, that then can introduce you or link you to that political champion. You can do things guerrilla style like we did, but you got to have a strategy for taking it to the next level. Because for one thing, you don't want to go down in a blaze of misunderstanding with the bureaucracy. And if you can dream it like we did, we wanted the bureaucracy not only to say yes, but it was a big issue. Like that guy who was here a little while ago, he's an urbanist. Like from an urbanist point of view, it's inescapable that the whole city is missing, not just gathering places, but agency. Everywhere people feel like they can't do things. So we wanted agency to be unleashed and we wanted gathering places everywhere. So to get there, you need the bureaucracy to start helping, not just to beat them. You don't want them to feel like they've lost. So this is one of the most beautiful pieces of our story is we engaged them from the beginning and always brought our humanity. So back about meetings, we would check in. We would be like, how are you doing? You know, we would bring like a child with us. We were just trying to humanize the environment and get to know them. And it wasn't to trick them, it was to be humans. This is a thing I didn't maybe talk about enough last night. I mentioned a few indigenous influences. We did have an architect named Elk River, also known as Calvin Magpie. He was a Cheyenne man. And he would coach us in how to engage consciousness, how to transform people through how you held space for them to step into their humanity. And so without his coaching, we might not have known. We might have gotten mad at people. But getting mad at people doesn't necessarily help anything. So we kept showing up, bringing kindness, understanding. I remember feeling like, so I know I'm a villager, and I also know the bureaucrat is a villager, but they don't. Our ancestors may have known each other and danced together. Who knows what we all went through? And I know that. And they would know that too. So we have to get to know each other. So in those meetings with them, our team went in inviting them into their humanity. And that's not to say they're living in a completely inhuman experience, but I can tell you, bureaucrats will say to you, they hate their work. It's repetitious. They're constantly telling people no. Here's something. City planners go to school to try to figure out how to plan a better future, and all they end up doing is processing development applications and getting people to comply with the rules. So they're demoralized. So we knew that about bureaucrats, and we just kept offering that to them. And finally, when some of the Department of Transportation officials that were mad at us for not stopping, they were like, why should we help you? And we sincerely said, because we know that you want to have a more meaningful and fulfilling experience in your work. And what we're offering is the idea that the street is for culture and not just cars. And that would enable you somehow to use your own creative discretion and be able to bring people together out in that space. I remember being part of that conversation. There's so much more I didn't know. Like back then I didn't know that up to 1920, American streets were just filled with children playing because cars hadn't really come online yet. And it was only in 1920 that the federal government created basically jaywalking laws. People don't know it, but jay is a derogatory slur for a person. It's kind of like a Roman calling someone a pagan or a heathen. You know, you're just the other. A jay was a person from the country who would just kind of walk as the crow flies. So jaywalking was a person who didn't go to the corner and turn 90 degrees and cross where they're supposed to. So in 1920, the federal government, it's a crazy story. Everybody should be told this when they're in kindergarten. This is what happened. In Cincinnati, Ohio, and Kansas City, two very conservative cultures, the community was witnessing the cars that were in the streets killing people. And there was no regulation. I don't think there were stop signs. People hadn't begun to address these issues. And so Cincinnati and Kansas City were both proposing local restrictions on automobile speed. They wanted it so that when you entered their borders of their cities, you would have to pull a lever and mechanically restrict the speed of the car to no more than 25 miles an hour. And at that point, the automobile and oil industries intervened and persuaded the president, Senate, and House leaders to draft legislation that immediately declared that streets were for cars and invented the crime of jaywalking. This all happened rapidly without the consent of anybody. So here we are, now more than 100 years later, and we've gotten used to thinking that streets are just for cars. But with a little historical context, you can learn that used to be used as a commons. Even if we were in the grid, a mother could listen outside of her window and hear her children playing in the streets and know that they're right there. And among the zillions of negative impacts of making the streets just for cars, suddenly children had to go far away from the house to a designated play space, even far away from the other kids of the neighborhood, which, means that you don't know if they're safe or not. They're not building community by playing where they live. Endless impacts that have led to such a state of, unsafe conditions now. So these are the issues that we're addressing. Ultimately, I guess I'm just going to kind of end by saying our community is designed to send everyone away from their home, to meet their needs, to make money, to pay for their reality, to have to go somewhere else all the time, whether it's getting food or building community. And to me, the ultimate goal is to close the feedback loops by coming home to where you live and being powerful with the people around you. For me, that was a realization 27 years ago when I really got started on my contribution to this activism. And I committed to that place. And I was surprised, because if you'd asked me, like, where do you want to live for the rest of your life, where you'll make a commitment to community building, it would have been like an island in Thailand. I mean, that just occurs to me first. Or it would have been at the beach or somewhere really beautiful. But in the moment where I realized I needed to set down my roots, it was in this neighborhood that had nothing remarkable about it except the people. And once I got started, I still had biases like, well, this person seems sort of crazy and this person's really irritating, but by engaging and growing with them, it became my family and the people that I love the most. And I think that's what's there for everybody. So I'll just close there. Thanks, everybody. We did have some books that people can use to organize, but they're all sold. But if anybody wants one, you can just send me an email and I can make sure you get one. They're $25 each. I think we might be able to send a virtual version, so just let me know if you want that. And I do have some cards in case you want something like that, or you just want to tell me what you're doing, or get some feedback on your ideas. So I've got cards here right now if anybody wants to take some. And you and I can talk about anything you like.
Yeah, well, so I'm trying to develop an opportunity in the Portland area. So
Oh, yeah.
it's wild to want to network with you and let's see. So one of my friends that used to live here, she was one of the engineers.
Down a little bit. That should be good. Yeah. That was Mark Lakeman here in Bakersfield at Grace Street Community Garden, which is part of the Apple Core project. And it's a pretty cool place. I plan to get out here at some point and make a video about it. So, yeah, thanks for tuning in. Have a good one.